Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we are looking at the DS1621xs Plus, and we're comparing it against the TVS-h674. I know this is the 8-bay, I don't have the 6-bay here, but we've got this on the table. But just not look at those 2 bays at the end and we'll be laughing. But we're going to compare these two NASs as quickly as possible. So, straight away, when you're looking at these two devices, the first thing we have to bear in mind is the sheer difference in release. There's about more than a year and a half release difference between these two devices, with this one arriving in the second half, I believe, of 2020, and this one arriving right at the end of 2022. So you are going to expect significant differences in hardware, but I don't think you're really ready for just about how different these two devices are. To put it into perspective, when you look at the pricing of this right now, at the beginning of 2023, the 1621xs Plus arrives for between $1,200 and $1,600 in the US. That's looking at B&H and Newegg. Around $1,400 to $1,600 Nika. That's looking at Amazon and Box. And in Europe, if you're looking at Saturn or Amazon.de, you're looking at around $1,500 to €1,700 there. The reason for that little gap in disparity is because the device has been on the market for so long that some people have offers the pricing is slightly different. Now, in the case of the QNAP there, the 674, there are other reasons for the disparity in pricing, and that is because the hardware configurations that are available. It's available in an i3 and an i5 model. So the prices range, I hate seagulls, for between $1,500 and $1,900. I really hate seagulls today. In terms of pounds, £1,400 to £1,800, and in terms of euros, €1,450 to €2,000. But do bear in mind, again, it is a very new device. At the time of recording, it's not even been out for a month and a half, 2 months. The result is that the pricing feeds and kind of the price around the internet there is going to be much, much closer to the RRP. And in some cases, because there's different versions out there, it is going to make the pricing there occasionally incorrect. But the result is that this device, the 674, is going to be the more expensive generally, although there isn't a direct means of making a comparison, given the year release difference between them and the differing versions that are out there on the QNAP. Has to be said that when it comes to the money you're laying on the table, you are going to be spending less on the Synology NAS there. But it's not all about money. Let's stop talking about price and talk about value and talk about what these two bring to the table. And the first thing that has to be noted immediately on the 1621xs Plus is that it arrives with 10 GBE. It's got one copper 10G port there, 10G base T network port there on the rear, which means that you can take advantage of traditional 1 GBE for your local network, your low priority stuff, or, security and maintenance and such. And you've got a 10 GBE port there to open up a 1000 megabytes per second bandwidth between it and the rest of your connected network there, or directly patch into the device and edit over 10 GBE, which is lovely. So alongside that, there is also a PCIe upgrade slot in the rear that allows you to add more network ports there, or add further upgrade cards there towards 25 GBE, and there are other PCIe cards from Synology as well. There is a cache card, but you don't need to because there are 2 cache ports already inside there, 2 M2 NVMe ports Gen 3. So that sounds pretty good, right? Why hasn't this got 10 GBE? What exactly is that bringing to the party? Well, it does have 2.5 GBE ports inside, and it does have the option to upgrade the PCIe upgrade slot, something we'll touch on later on. What it does bring to the party is ZFS, Zettabyte File System. You've heard me talk about this in other videos. Indeed, I think I said this in a very similar video wearing this exact same shirt, but ZFS on this is a real deal breaker for many of you out there, because ZFS has always had kind of, when it comes to enterprise and hyperscale storage, and particularly to high-end business, ZFS is the absolute king, not only because of the speed of deployment, speed of RAID creation, speed of RAID resync, RAID resilvering and more, but also enhanced techniques to not only have faster access and write off data, but lots of reclamation I should say, options and advantages built in to ZFS. Things like inline data deduplication, which allows data that's the same come from multiple sources for the system to only have one copy, but keep a record of everyone that needs it. Things like OSs and database and shared team folders. They will do that inline, that is live. Same goes for inline compression, where as data is being written to the system, it is compressing it before popping it on a shelf there, thereby saving space. And finally, inline compaction, which is going to be tremendously advantageous for those using SSDs, where wear and write and durability factors are key. And inline compaction is when it makes sure that the data is all put in the most space efficient means as possible. Yes, you've got the option of BTRFS on the Synology there alongside ext4, but BTRFS is still a little bit green around the gills for some users, and they will definitely flock towards the idea of ZFS, when ZFS is generally more heavily associated with things like TrueNAS and stuff like that. So having that on a turnkey enclosure is going to be advantageous. It's also worth highlighting that one of the lovely features of Synology, one of the underlying popular things that a lot of people like, known as SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID, isn't available on the 1621xs. The XS series doesn't have it. Synology say that at this tier, people want performance, and therefore SHR, which although allows you to mix and match drives and scale up your storage a lot more easily, it lowers the performance. So they've removed it from the XS tier, which is a real shame. Whereas ZFS brings to the table triple parity in RAID Z and a larger arrangement of RAID configurations at your disposal. Although it has to be said that expanding storage in a RAID isn't that great when it comes to ZFS. Expanding RAID, although things are getting better on ZFS for traditional expansion of actually adding drives to an existing RAID and not just adding another bolted on RAID group into the pool, expansion is probably easier on the Synology than it is on the QNAP there. But who knows, one day things might change for ZFS there. But rolling back to the Synology DSM 7.1, 7.2, whatever you want to say, it's still the dog's Nadgers. DSM on Synology is the crowning glory of that platform. It's probably, when you're spending money on a Synology NAS, arguably where the bulk of that money is going. It is a complete ecosystem platform with alternatives to a number of third-party applications and services you use, whereas the QNAP has a greater degree of support of third-party hardware. It still has a great platform in QTS and QUTS, but it has to be said that it has a broader scope trying to support a lot of third parties in a way the Synology will produce their own app, their own service, their own featured program, where it was designed such as Synology Chat, replacing WhatsApp and Skype, Synology Mail, Synology Drive, Synology Surveillance Station, Virtual Machine. Like all of these tools, the Active Backup Suite within DSM are designed to create this perfect one brand ecosystem, whereas on the QNAP, there's a little bit more of an open door policy when it comes to third parties out there, and it has to kind of maintain a balance there, which sometimes will come across a little bit more higgity when you're using the system, whereas the Synology is trying to go for this slick, easy one party, something we'll touch on later on. But still, nonetheless, DSM, with its range of options and application in the collaboration suite, its inclusion of Synology C2 as well, their cloud platform that you can roll in for another tier of your backup strategy, is just going to be tremendously appealing to those of you that want to not just buy a system but buy a complete office or home solution there, which is often overlooked. But why are a lot of users looking at the 7.4 series then if DSM is so great? Well, I'll tell you one of the things, the hardware. Have you seen the CPU in this series? Mwah! It is a 12th gen Intel Core series. Across the 4, 6 and 8 bay device, it starts at a Pentium, goes to an i3, an i5, an i7 and an i9. Although I will highlight that the 6 bay only has the i3 or the i5 option, those CPUs are still absolute bangers anyway. Multi-core and tremendously multi-thread, these CPUs open the door to a number of different features. Not only have they got high-end integrated graphics, and they are 21, 22 generation processors, but on top of that, they bring to the table PCIe Gen 4. Gen 4, larger bandwidth per lane. The CPU is made up of lots of lanes in the chipset that allow you to bolt on different services and allow those services to have more bandwidth and therefore more speed. PCIe Gen 4 at 2000 megs a lane opens the door tremendously onto the other parts of the hardware that can be bolted onto this device, one of which we will definitely talk about later on. And with the 1621xs Plus being a Gen 3 system, although it does have the PCIe upgrade, it's got 10GB and all that stuff, Gen 3 is 1000 megs, and even those M2 NVMEs inside, they're used for caching only. You can't use them for raw storage, but you can on the QNAP, but more on that later on. But let's really bring the spotlight back on that whole idea of DSM, the Synology ecosystem, because we've got to talk about the simplicity of this system. If you don't really want to spend a lot of time configuring, you don't want to have to get out your old IT book from school, you don't want to be a bit of a tech head, although the QNAP is quite user-friendly, I think it will be safe to say that you do need a bit more technical nous, as the learning curve for a true novice or a noob is going to be higher, whereas on the Synology, Not only is DSM significantly more user-friendly, not only is the configuration, which can be done with a mobile phone, done on a browser, incredibly straightforward. Even attaching the two expansions to this device, the two DX517s, plug, play, done, done. It's that straightforward. The warranty being 5 years, the support on it just being a lot easier and a lot more fluid. Even the upgrades, although there is arguably less support of third-party hardware, such as third-party hard drives, third-party memory upgrades, third-party PCIe upgrades, which a lot of users do not like, that lack of open-ended nature to the compatibility. There are people that are looking for a simplistic solution, set up, forget, do what you're told, do what you promise, that will love that. They don't want to have to browse a catalogue of hard drives, SSDs and PCI upgrades. They want to know the 5 things that work and then pick one of them. And that simplicity cannot be overlooked for users out there that are watching this that want a nice, simple, straightforward solution that shuts up and does what it's told. Whereas on the QNAP's open-ended nature and its compatibility of third-party hardware, third-party software, to a larger degree than that of the QNAP results in a broader kind of usage and a lot more you have to learn. But more on that later on. Going back to this system and that CPU, we've got to talk about PCIe Gen 4 M2 NVMe's. That's right, this 6-bay system is technically an 8-bay system because those 6 SATA storage bays are joined by 2 M2 NVMe bays that can give you between 6 and maybe 7,500 megabytes per second performance there. To put that into perspective, the hard drive bays on these systems will give you, if you're lucky, about 250, 260. Yes, there's SATA, so 600 megs, but traditional hard drives don't really go higher than about 260, 270 on a good day enterprise drive. And with SATA SSDs, you're looking at 450, 500 at best. Yes, you can rate them, but the idea that you could fully populate this device with SATA SSDs and be outpaced by one of the M2 NVMe bays inside is pretty bloody good. Also bear in mind, those 2 NVMe's, not only can they be used for caching, but they can also be used for raw storage pools. You can run the OS off those, you can run individual apps off those, and again, it means a much faster system for VMs, for databases, for whatever you need. And remember, as mentioned, the M2 NVMe bays on this are only for caching. If you're going to use caching, great, but M2 NVMe's are quite expensive. So I like the idea that when I'm using M2 NVMe's, that I can use them how I want. But another thing some users may not know about these two systems, even though both are 6 bays, I know this is the 8 bay, again, stop looking at those 2 bays, this system runs quieter. Although both of them are metal chassis, I would say this runs noticeably quieter when in operation. It's got 2 rear-mounted fans, it uses a passive ventilated cooling system around that, whereas on the QNAP, it's got 4 fans. It is entirely metal all the way around, but they're bigger fans on the rear. There's a dedicated CPU fan there on the side, hovering over that controller board there. The internal PSU's got its own big fan there. And just overall, between these two systems, this is going to make less noise. And if you're going to be in close proximity, I'm not going to say it's like a banging night in Hackney in the 90s, but it is still going to make less ambient noise than that QNAP there. Also on top of that, once you reach enterprise level hard drives there, you start looking at 10, 12, 14 TBs, getting bigger and bigger. We're seeing 22 and 24 TB drives. The result is that the rotation of the platters inside and the arm reading that disk is going to make a lot more noise, and that kind of is boosted by the metal chassis there. And there is some dampening there with the rubber feet and stuff like that, but just generally, whether using enterprise drives or non-enterprise drives, the Synology is going to be the quieter of the two. However, I mentioned earlier on about expansions, and I've talked about this in other videos. The expandability of these devices is much more diverse on the TVS-h674. Now, I mentioned simplicity, and that's true. You can bolt on 2 5-bay expansions on this, and those expansions are connected via eSATA, which is a 600 megs connection. So you're attaching 5 hard drives with a limited bandwidth there of 600 megs total. So those 5 drives, you could have fully saturated 10G if you wanted to, but you've only got, for each of them, 600 megs to play with. Whereas on the QNAP, you have got a 2, a 4, an 8 and a 12-bay expansion option. These arrive in hardware RAID, JBOD. They arrive connected via USB 3.2 Gen 1 at 5 gig, USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gig, and SAS cards that you can install inside, which, although you will lose a PCIe slot, will mean that you can attach an expansion to this in the I believe the D1600, which can give you up to 5,000 megabytes per second bandwidth travel with that storage. So more expansion options, more bays, and faster performance overall. Yes, it's more complex, but at the same time, just tremendously more scalable in terms of storage. But if you're talking enterprise, if you're talking about things that people at the high end in the data center smoking their cigars really want, this system arrives with 8 gig of ECC memory there. Error correcting code, which means as you are writing data to the system and you're stuffing it away on cold or warm storage, the ECC memory means that when data is passing through the memory during the write op, a blueprint is created, a parity there, which is stored on an additional chip on the memory, and then as the data is passed through and reaches the end of the memory, it is compared against that blueprint. If there's any inconsistencies, it repairs it before sending it to the storage. That limits a lot of inconsistencies in your data long term, things like bit rot and stuff like that. And when you're going to archival storage 10, 20 years later, you want to know that that data is safe, it's intact. Now, the memory inside this does go higher. This goes up to 32. This goes to 64 gig, and I believe it's possible to go higher as well if with the right memory modules. But at the same time, you can't use it doesn't arrive with ECC memory by default. You might be able to use ECC memory. I've not tried that yet, but it's worth remembering that this arrives with that 8 gig of ECC straight off the bat there. But when it comes to scaling, we already just touched on that about scalability. I do think it's worth, again, zooming in on compatibility on this device of third party, because, again, if you are a user that is not interested in that single ecosystem, not interested in turning 200 options to 5, if you are someone that wants to browse, wants to have specific components from hardware companies like Intel, Mellanox and stuff like that, this is going to be more for you, because it has a broader compatibility in terms of hard drives and SSDs from all the third-party brands. It has a broader compatibility of PCIe upgrades, not just network upgrades, so Intel, Mellanox, Cisco, etc. But on top of that, it has compatibility of other kinds of PCI upgrade cards. So Wi-Fi 6 upgrade cards, adding different network interfaces there, adding USB ports, adding graphics cards to this device are all supported. The support of things like USB devices is broader and wider on this device than it is on the Synology there. And with the range and that CPU inside and its compatibility listing largely meaning that there's a good chance that there'll either be a Thunderbolt 4 version of this in the future or potentially a PCIe Thunderbolt 4 upgrade card like we saw in the Thunderbolt 3 series or the 88X series. The upgradability towards third-party hardware on this is tremendously larger than that of the Synology, and it's worth bearing that in mind. Again, if you're an IT buff, if you're you've been in IT, you've built your own PCs for years, this is going to be a much more appealing about that hardware. One of the oft-mentioned things I see in the comments is, I wish I had Synology software and QNAP hardware. Sorry, you can't have that, really, in the broader legal sense. But at the same time, if what you care about is hardware, go for the 674. It is a monster on day one, and its scalability in terms of storage and third-party hardware is much broader and bigger. But if you want simplicity, if you want set up and forget, if you want handhold, if you want simplicity in the whole ecosystem and to wrap your home and business around the device and have tools that are designed by the same people that built the storage, go for the Synology. Because although a number of those things are available from QNAP, they're just not delivered as polished and as simply as it is on the Synology. But this has been, in 18 minutes and a little bit, 18 minutes and change, comparing the DS1621xs Plus with the TVS-h674. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, let me know in the comments. Click like if you did. Click subscribe if you want to learn more about these devices and others as the year goes on. If you need help, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares, blue button on the right hand side, or go to the free community support forum with me, Eddie, who does the most work there, and other NAS community members can help you out with your questions. And if you have found this video or this channel helpful, and more importantly, you were going to go to Amazon anyway, use the links in the description to take you there. It won't cost you anything extra, and anything, and I really do mean anything you buy once you get to Amazon from that link will result in a kickback coming here to NAS Compares, which is only me and Eddie running NAS Compares, and that money helps us carry on doing what we do. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.